Hey, everybody. Welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive. I know you're expecting Tony Shaffer to talk about that CIA story out of the New York Times. We're gonna postpone that for now because we got some breaking news that's coming out from the White House that has direct implication on all of this stuff. And we want to talk to you while these comments are still fresh and echoing around here in Washington, D.C., because there's been a big powwow meeting at the White House this morning between the senior leaders of both the Senate and the House and the President of the United States over this funding for Ukraine. And the whole issue was going to be, where are we going to go from here? Lots of dire consequences and warnings about what happens if Ukraine doesn't get the money and all that kind of thing. We're going to talk a lot about that. But first of all, let's find out, exactly what happened. Here's what's being said, first of all, by the participants as they came out of this meeting. We're going to start first with the president.
And Ukraine, I think the need is urgent. I hope we get to speak to that a little bit. And I think the consequences of inaction every day in Ukraine are dire. I've been speaking to some of our G7 partners, and you just got back, Chuck. They're very concerned. And
so he was a little bit muted there, but when Chuck, who he was referred to there, Senator Chuck Schumer, when he came out and made some comments, he was a little bit more emphatic.
We said to the speaker, get it done. I said, I've been around here a long time. It's maybe 4 or 5 times that history is looking over your shoulder. I talked about my trip to Ukraine, where I met soldiers who had Russian artillery in range with the drones they have, but had no ammunition to fire at them. We talked about 4 brigades who are ready to go, Ukrainian, no arms, and how serious the lack of arms was. And it was the consensus in that room, Zelensky and Ukraine will lose the war if we don't get the arms and don't get them quickly.
Okay, some things that we need to pause in this story right here, because there are some things that you need to understand here based on what he said, not quite giving you the full picture. This really highlights, his comments here highlights a huge problem, in my view, for the American people and this issue about whether we should give money to Ukraine or not. On the first point, he's saying that, they had all these artillery, which I found very curious, the hand and arm signals that went along with that. But whatever it was, he said, there's artillery and they're in range of the Russians, but they don't have any ammunition. And we need this supplemental to get that out. Folks, I've told you this many times here. The thought that there's like a bunch of artillery shells just sitting around in some warehouse, like in Costco or something like that. And if you just have the cash squeezed out by the Congress, then you can just grab it and just start firing those pellets off, to Kiev and getting them distributed down to the gun line so that they can start shooting. That's not the case. Already, the West in general is cranking into high gear as fast as they can. There's already money for this part here. There's no one's waiting for money to move this forward. But as I pointed out in the show a couple of days ago, the best that the West is shooting for right now by the end of the year, the end of this year, and this is, by the way, concurrent with what's going on in Europe, they're also in high gear trying to kick into gear their production and creating new capacity. They expect to produce about 1.4 million shells by the end of this calendar year. Russia is on pace on their own to produce 4.5 million shells on their own. The point being that Ukraine and even the total West altogether is going to be chasing an uphill battle because Russia also is going to continue to expand their capacity. So at the end of the year, you're still going to be 4-1 behind in production alone. That's on top of whatever they're getting from other sources, the Russians are. And we know that both North Korea and Iran are both providing stuff as well. So they're getting it from multiple sides, and those are going up. But the second issue is money from Congress has no impact on that. It may be useful later on, but it's not going to hurry that up. It's not going to raise the amount of money because we saw the Secretary of State, what is that, about a week or 10 days ago, something like that, was bragging about a contract that was signed by Western partners for $1.5 billion to create 220,000 artillery shells. Those things are in the process. But that
last week, NATO signed a $1.2 billion contract to produce 220,000 artillery shells. That's going to help allies restock their own arsenals, and it complements efforts by the United States, by the European Union, by Ukraine, to ramp up defense production. This will make NATO itself and all allies much more resilient for future threats as we move forward.
What the Secretary of State didn't say there, and what Schumer didn't say, and may not even know, is that that contract is about 2 years or so before it's going to actually produce 220,000 artillery shells, which, by the way, is about 3 weeks worth of combat usage on a national level. So in 3 years, you're going to have enough for a few weeks. And of course, you won't even have that because, as he noted there, a lot of that's going to go to replace the replenishment of the shells that from the national inventories of the Western countries that have already provided some that have been used already. So you see the number just keeps going, shrinking down to minuscule. Whether there's money coming out of the Congress now or not is not going to have any impact on that. So that's the first point. The second point is that is the United States the only country in the world, the entire Western world, that can provide ammunition? You had Schumer there make this dire comment. In fact, I want you to see it again. I want this in context. Gary, play that one of Schumer again, please.
We said to the Speaker, get it done. I said, I've been around here a long time. It's maybe 4 or 5 times that history is looking over your shoulder. I talked about my trip to Ukraine where I met soldiers who had Russian artillery in range with the drones they have, but had no ammunition to fire at them. We talked about 4 brigades who are ready to go, Ukrainian, no arms, and how serious the lack of arms was. And it was the consensus in that room, Zelensky and Ukraine will lose the war if we don't get the arms and don't get them quickly.
So only America can provide arms. There's these 4 brigades that are just sitting there with no arms, no weapons, no artillery shells. And darn it all, if not for those Americans, look, I don't know if Senator Schumer is aware that he was played. Look, I was in the military and I saw what happened when U.S. senators came to our area. And I know for a fact that most of it was what we always called the dog and pony show, which is where we would tell the senators exactly what we wanted them to know, what we think that they needed when they went back to Congress to give us funding. That's domestically, okay? Imagine if it's the Ukraine side. So when Schumer comes out there, he has no independent way to know whether he's being played or whether he's seeing the ground truth, because he himself doesn't know. All he knows is what he's being told. The idea that there are 4 brigades of combat power units in Ukraine that are just sitting around with no guns and they can't do anything is laughable. Of course they aren't. There's a shortage of ammunition. That part is unquestioned. It's all over the place. That's not changed. But to say that there's these guns that are in range and they have no ammunition, apparently, according to most reports, Ukraine is shooting about 3.6 thousand shells per day, which is about a fourth or a fifth of what the Russians are shooting, which is a very low number. It's definitely insufficient to even to be able to hang on to the line, much less to go on the offensive. They were shooting around 7,000 to 8,000 per day during the summer offensive last year, just to give you some comparison there. But to say that they don't have any, either Schumer was played, and so he's got this song and dance story, this sad tale to give to the American cameras, or he's actually playing to the cameras and he's exaggerating things to make it sound so dire. And look, we got to look. This is politics, and there's a lot of realities here on the ground. What do you think the chances are that the Democratic leader of the Senate is going to publicly call out the Republican Speaker of the House of Representatives and say, get it done, and that Mike Johnson's going to go tail tucked between his legs, go in and say, okay, Republican House members, we were told by the president and the Speaker of the Democratic House that we have to give them the money. I mean, do you really think that? I mean, it's hard to. We'll see how it plays out. I'm not a political expert. There's a lot of people who have a lot more knowledge about this, but from my observation, it seems to me the chances that the Republican Speaker of the House is going to go back to his conference and do what the president and the Democratic leader of the Senate just told him to do, and he would keep his job after we've already seen the last one lose it because he worked with Democrats. What do you think the chances are of that? I'm guessing they're pretty low. So if the Democrats are actually hoping that this meeting would shake the Congress and make it come up with the votes to get this bill passed, think that they're barking up along a tree here, and they're not going to have a lot of success. But let's go on. That wasn't the only thing of the day. So a couple of days ago, you had one of Senator Schumer's colleagues, a Republican senator, who was calling into question the whole nature of this whole bill.
The way that these guys have obsessively focused on the problems of Ukraine to the exclusion of everything else that's going on in our country. I have seen colleagues of mine, even, Republican colleagues, who are much more emotionally invested in what's going on 6,000 miles away than they are in their own country. If the thing you care most about, we can agree to disagree on Ukraine. I imagine a lot of you agree with me, some of you don't. Yeah. But if the thing you care most about is a conflict 6,000 miles away, you should not be a leader of this country. Focus on our own country's problems.
Now, that was obviously a popular issue at the CPAC conference where he was speaking, but it's also popular among Republicans, but it's also an issue that's gaining in popularity across the board in America, just among people. They're saying, wait a minute, why are we worried so much about, Ukraine and this war that is obviously not succeeding? And as I will tell you graphically and in great detail, it's not going to succeed. And we've already spent, the West altogether, about $200 billion to Ukraine to now continue to be losing ground. Why then does it make sense to pour another $60 billion down the hole when there's no prospect that that's going to reverse course here? And by the way, these people who keep claiming that, okay, we're going to hold the ground in 2024 so that in 2025, then they can go back to the offensive. You know what those people aren't telling you is that this $60 billion would go a long way to giving Ukraine a chance to hold ground, but it won't do anything to even have the possibility of an offensive in 2025, which means it's not just about $60 billion. It's about another 100 or 150 plus billion more on top of that later this year and into next year, because without large numbers of tanks, artillery pieces, missiles, millions more artillery shells, interceptor rockets, air defense systems, more aircraft, which we're also going to talk about in a minute. Without all of that, a massive new package, there isn't even the prospect, the possibility of Ukraine going on to a war. Understand that. When people are saying this $60 billion is necessary for Russia to win, Ukraine to win, it only means to give them a shot at holding the ground so that those same people can circle back around and ask you for triple that amount or more for the next year. Understand that. This is not a one-time deal. This is the beginning. That's an absolute guaranteed fact. Now, I don't think that that's lost on the Speaker of the House, because coming out of that same meeting, apparently after Schumer spoke, he also went on camera to give his view.
We need more frank and honest conversations on Capitol Hill, so I was happy to participate in this. We did that as a group, and then I had a one-on-one for a period of time with the president, just he and I in the Oval Office. There was discussion about the supplemental spending package, and I was very clear with the president and all those in the room that the House is actively pursuing and investigating all the various options on that, and we will address that in a timely manner. But again, the first priority of the country is our border and making sure it's secure.
You see, he's given an information right there. He's giving you a clue. Not just is he not going to obey what the Democratic speaker or leader of the Senate just told him to do, he's also not going to tell his constituents no, because he has been outspoken from the beginning to say it's our border first, which is similar to what J.D. Vance said there, that it's about, taking care of the things in our country. And of course, the border is one of the bigger issues there. Secure the border, get policies in place to make sure that we're protected. Then we can think about going and helping some other people. It just doesn't make sense to so many Americans that you're going to put these tens of billions of dollars to Ukraine, to Israel, to Taiwan, and some other places there, while you're actually not doing anything for the border. It's curious to me that the Senate wouldn't even include that. Now, it's always possible that in conference they would go back and say, all right, well, we'll include the border issues that you wanted so that we can get some kind of a bill passed. I don't know that that's going to happen. It's certainly possible. But if Schumer was going to do that, he was actually asked that when the Senate passed this bill originally, if they would in conference go back and add in some border provisions. And he ignored the question. He said, well, we just need to focus on this, saying clearly, no, that's not anything I'm willing to do. So we'll see. if Senator Schumer is going to be willing to go back on what he said and do something that apparently they didn't want to do, which is why they stripped it out in the first place. All of these things keep piling up together to show you there is little chance that this is coming. This is going to happen. Now, one of the questions I think it's important for us to ask is why? Why this emotion behind getting money to Ukraine? What is it about? Now, there's like any issue, there's a lot of different reasons it's going into it. Some noble, maybe some not so noble. But there's one you just can't get by because it's repeated so often. Gary, I'm going to throw you a curveball here. Let me know if you can bring this one up. When we had a couple of days ago, a clip by Victoria Nuland, one of the, I believe, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, who's really outspoken about talking about, well, hey, this money is going to help us because it's all about cash for American people. If we have that, and Gary, can you roll it? I think it's coming. You're not going to want to miss this one. This is one of many. I think it'll be playing here in a second. But while that's coming up there, we've had a number of these on there. There's been a Secretary of State has said this gleefully many times. You've had all kinds of other people come on and say, hey, this money's going to Senator McConnell has actually said the same thing. It's like, hey, this is a great deal for our arms industry. So we'll see, how that works out there. But the issue being that a lot of people say this money is actually going to buy American arms and to help the military industrial complex. Why does that seem to be such an important issue here? Also at that same CBAC, you had Tulsi Gabbard come on, who recently, or actually is about to publish a new book on why she left the Democratic Party. And one of the reasons, which is she's been outspoken against since she was running for president in 2020 of the Democratic Party, is that too many people are focused on war. Here's what she had to say, which is very much related to what we're talking about right now.
We must stop the bipartisan warmongers of Washington who constantly beat their war drums, who have pushed us to the precipice of World War III and a nuclear catastrophe. Now, President Eisenhower warned us clearly in his farewell address about these people, those in Washington who bend the knee to their bosses in the military-industrial complex and then shrug their shoulders and look the other way at the costly, damaging, and potentially catastrophic consequences of their decisions, the cost that every one of us pays.
So, the warmongers, and Gary does have this one up here. Here's Victoria Nuland sharing just how gleeful she is at the thought of giving more money to the military-industrial complex.
This is not just about Ukraine. If we don't stop Putin in Ukraine, he will keep going, and autocrats and tyrants all around the world will take comfort and think that they too can chunk off a piece of their neighbor. And by the way, we have to remember that the bulk of this money is going right back into the U.S. economy to make those weapons, including good-paying jobs in some 40 states across the United States.
Secretary of State, her boss, some number of weeks past, actually said, hey, it's a win-win, man. It is such a great deal. Like this war, keeping it going is a good deal. It's not a good deal. It's a terrible waste of money because, folks, that money's not going to American business. It's coming out of your pocket. And it's going into something that's perpetuating a war that cannot be won. But that's not stopping the folks here from trying to make that case. And in fact, I believe 2 days ago, we had the U.S. ambassador to NATO talk about something that's going on right now that actually doesn't get much notice because of the war going on the ground and between Russia and Ukraine. But just on the other side of that border, you have a large-scale operation going on by NATO. Here's what she had to say.
It's actually 90,000 NATO troops exercising together to prepare for various contingencies, most notably to prepare for any sort of Russian incursion on NATO territory. NATO allies have come together to reinforce and fortify the eastern flank. We're moving troops to the eastern flank. We're enhancing our deterrence and defense and sending a very strong signal to Russia that he should never consider touching NATO territory.
Okay, a very strong signal to Russia, meaning in context, what she's trying to make you believe is that, holy cow, Putin is just poised on the border, just like he was with Ukraine in 2022 or 2021, late 2021. And he is this close to actually launching an operation. And if we don't have this big thing where we're going to move troops to the east and put this big demonstration on with 90,000 troops, that'll send a signal to him not to invade this time. There is no such buildup of Russian forces. My God, does anyone need any more clear proof that after 2 full years of war, the Russian side has gotten about 18 to 19% of Ukraine? They're inching forward now after 2 years. They may eventually get all the way to the Dnieper River. I don't know. John Mearsheimer on our show a couple of months back actually argued that he thinks that Russia will eventually, before this war is over, get 8 provinces of Ukraine, which are all on the eastern side of the Dnieper River. I don't know if that's going to be the case. It remains to be seen, but certainly Russia's moving in that direction. But it will be also clear that that is the absolute limit of their capacity to put any troops out there, because then they would have to basically man and occupy those troops for some number of years into the future. But look, they don't have the physical capacity to even for sure be able to get another province going forward. By what logic or rationale can anyone in NATO claim that there is an actual conventional threat that the Russian forces are going to move across into NATO territory? So again, to recap, this is important to get, 17 to 18% of the one country on your border with no Navy, a paltry Air Force, and no treaty allies that are going to fight for you. You can't get more than that right there after 2 years of war. Who thinks that Russia has any chance to actually attack into a very soon 32-member military alliance with nuclear weapons, a very powerful air forces, large numbers of modern trained ground forces, that they would even attempt such a folly? No one would. Russia has no interest in it. They don't have the capacity to do it. It's fiction. Straight up. It's not true. What they're telling you, what NATO's telling you, what all of these people in America and these leaders and these retired generals and some members of Congress keep telling you is flat out, factually untrue. It's just not true. They don't have the capacity to do it. So then you have to get back to, well, then what's the point here? Why so emphatic about it? Why are you so alarmist that World War III could be coming? Folks, World War III is not going to come unless we start it. Russia has no interest in World War III. They want to get this war done and off the books so that they can get back to rebuilding their country, for crying out loud. They don't have any interest in starting a World War III. They know they cannot win it. They can't win it conventionally, and they can't win it nuclear. Gary, I'm going to see if I can get you to pull something else up we used recently of Vladimir Putin explaining how he knows that this would go bad if this goes nuclear. This is something that he said in February 2022, about 2 weeks before the war actually started, when the president of France went to actually visit him there in Moscow to try and avert war at the last minute. And Putin said, hey, if we get drawn into a war with NATO, if you guys try to come in, especially, and it includes trying to take Crimea from us, it's going to end up in a war. Check out what he said here if Gary's got it ready. Sorry, I keep throwing some curveballs at Gary today, but we're getting this stuff going. I think it's coming. He's getting it ready, and I'm thinking any second now it's going to come into our deal. Okay, sorry. If I'm going to throw a curveball, I need to give more warning on that. But yeah.
Я хочу еще раз все-таки подчеркнуть это. Я говорил, но мне очень бы хотелось, чтобы вы меня услышали все-таки в конце концов. И донесли это до своих читателей, зрителей и пользователей в интернете. Но вы понимаете или нет, что если Украина будет в НАТО и военным путем будет возвращать себе Крым, европейские страны автоматически будут втянуты в военный конфликт с Россией. Конечно, потенциал объединенной организации НАТО и России несопоставим. Мы понимаем. Но мы даже и понимаем, что Россия одна из ведущих ядерных держав. По некоторым компонентам, по современности даже многих опережает. Победителей не будет. И вы окажетесь втянутыми в этот конфликт помимо своей воли. И вы даже не успеете глазом моргнуть, когда будете исполнять пункт 5 Римского договора. Господин президент, конечно, не хочет этого развития. И я не хочу. И я не хочу. Поэтому здесь и находится. И
So you had Putin there on a national stage admitting that we are not equal conventionally. We're not compatible with NATO conventionally. He also said, though, that we are compatible nuclear weapons wise because we're a strong nuclear weapon state with more capacity than most, he said. And he said no one would win. He knows he wouldn't win. He said if you cross this line and if we end up getting into it, everyone's going to lose because he will use his nuclear weapons if he's forced into it. That's what I would like to hear from a Western leader, to be able to say, hey, we have an advantage over you conventionally, but nuclear weapons, everyone's going to lose here. So we're not going to threaten you and make you afraid of the West that could then go nuclear because we'll all lose in that case. Let me emphatically say that. If anything happens and we end up getting into a conflict with Russia that includes nuclear weapons, no one will win. The West will not win. If you think things are bad now, it's catastrophically bad, much worse if it ends up going nuclear. There will be no winners. The Ukraine side won't win. The Western side won't win. America will not win. Russia won't win. Nobody will win. All of humanity will lose. Even if it's not a thermonuclear destruction where all the cities are wiped out, even if it's only a limited nuclear engagement, which God help us if it even starts. But if it starts, God help us to make sure it doesn't expand. Even if it's a limited tactical nuclear engagement, it's going to be catastrophic for mankind. That will never be the same again. We don't want it to even touch on that. But yet we are continuing to touch on it because now then, even though there's no practical path for Ukraine to win the war conventionally, we're still going to throw some stuff in there. Now then, possibly within a few weeks, F-16s.
Despite harsh weather, time shortage, and the pressure to return to the fight, Ukrainian pilots and technicians are going through intense training at the Skrydstrup base in Denmark.
Well, combat experience is a thing that is really hard to overestimate, but still it is a really condensed program. I think the biggest boost here is not that combat experience, but the motivation to go back and keep fighting. It is really a super fun jet to fly. I'm not saying that MiG that I flew before is super boring, but the F-16 is definitely more agile. It feels like the jet wants you to fly it more aggressively.
Okay, just on the tactical level, that F-16 is not going to make any difference in this fight, folks. It's going to make some people some more money, selling more arms. We keep coming back around to that, but it's not going to change the outcome any because Russians have air defense systems. Ukraine only has a handful of pilots that can fly these things anyway. And just a handful of F-16s is not going to change the dynamic when Russia has thousands of combat aircraft and a nearly unlimited number of air defense systems that can keep them at bay. So that's not going to change anything. But what it is changing, along with that NATO exercise you saw there, it's making Putin feel more boxed in. So in response to that, on the same day, a couple of days ago, I guess, Putin got into a Tu-160 nuclear bomber and started flying around areas where nuclear weapons would be used. You know, he's trying to show, hey, I'm strong and whatever. I'm in a cockpit of a nuclear bomber. That's all for domestic show, of course. But the message is not lost. It shouldn't be lost on anybody that in the event that things go sideways, we have a nuclear triad of our own that we'll use. So when he said that back on February 7th of 2022, or he got in the cockpit a couple of days ago, that still remains on the table. And it's just boggles the mind that our leaders want to push up as close to that as we can and even threaten tactical setbacks, conventional loss to the Russian forces. What do you think the chances are that the Russian army, led by Putin or anyone, even if he should suddenly die tomorrow and someone take his place, is going to allow the Russian military to be driven out of all these areas that they claim they've annexed illegally, or they take it out of Crimea especially? Do you think that a conventional success would actually see Russian forces driven out and it not go nuclear? That's what you need to understand. That's what our leaders need to understand. That's what the Senate, the House, the White House need to understand. There's no end game here that turns out good for U.S. besides making a negotiated settlement to get this off the table today. You're not going to win a conventional war because before Russia would lose one, it's going to go nuclear. You can't win a nuclear war. All you can do is get millions of Americans killed in the counterstrike. So if those are your two, most likely outcomes, one on the conventional, one on the nuclear, and they're both catastrophically bad for America, why go down a path? To reiterate, make sure this sinks in. You can't win nuclear or conventional. You're not going to. You can't fight or win a nuclear exchange. Given those harsh, absolute realities, then the only thing that makes any sense is a negotiated settlement, not ponying up more money, not sending another tranche of $60 billion, which will be guaranteed 100% certain, followed up by another requirement, probably more than $100 billion following that up for 2025. You can count on it. It's impossible for it to be any other way. They're just not telling you that. Now, of course, that's good for some. Hey, that's a win-win, right, for American business. Folks, it's time to wise up and understand what's at stake here. I'm telling you the truth. I'm telling you what is demonstrably true. You don't have to be a military expert. What I'm telling you, the logic is impeccable. It's not that I'm anything brilliant. It's that I recognize simple ground truth reality. What we're pursuing here can't win. And it's time that our leaders in Washington figure this out. We'll see if they do. I can guarantee you, Daniel Davis Deep Dive is going to continue keeping you updated, and we will tell you the truth because we are unintimidated and uncompromised. And I don't care what anybody likes, Republican, Democrat, House, Senate, or White House. We will tell you the truth and the things that you need to know to keep you safe. And we'll keep up on top of this as it continues to develop as well. Whether it ends up getting any money or not, we will be here to bring that to you. Folks, listen, we got Doug McGregor coming on tomorrow at 11 a.m. and I promise you're not going to want to miss that. So be sure to tune in then. We ask you to like and subscribe and pass and send this to your friends here because they're going to want to see this. I promise you, you'll want to tune in at 11 o'clock tomorrow to see Doug. Thank you very much. And we will see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.